Welcome back, everybody, to Joe's Bibles. This is Joe, and today I'm going to give you tips for reading through the Bible. As many of you know, I'll be reading through the CSB, or the Christian Standard Bible, over the span of 4 months, September 1st all the way to December 31st. If you want to join me, there's still time. What I want to do is give you tips for how I'll be reading through the CSB over 4 months. So tip number 1 is to decide ahead of time where, when, and with what. For me, I will be reading through the Bible on my desk early in the morning using this Bible. This is the single column personal size. So determine and decide where, when, and with what. Second thing is pray. Pray and ask God to show you things. God, I know I'm reading through the Bible at this pace, but could you remind me that you are here with me as I'm reading through your word? The third thing is to preview and scan. You're going to be reading through a lot of stuff. So this is what I try to do. This is the Bible reading plan that we'll be using. A friend of mine helped me put this together. And what I want to do is, okay, the first day, September 1st, I'll be reading through 12 chapters of Genesis. So what I do is I go to my physical Bible, turn to Genesis chapter 1, and then I go to Genesis chapter 12, and I mark it off with this little tabby. So I know this is the number of pages that I'll be going through. Now, here's the other part that's really important. You want to preview that, but you also want to scan, making use of the headers in each chapter, what you're going to be reading. So Genesis chapter 1, I'm going to be reading through the creation story. Then I'll be reading through man and woman in the garden. Chapter 3, the temptation and the fall. Cain murders Abel, so on and so forth. What this does is it gives you a big picture ahead of time what exactly you'll be reading. So Genesis chapter 4 all the way to Genesis chapter 12, and the readings will end on the call of Abraham. Tip number 4, read with pacing. This type of reading is not devotional reading. This is about getting the big picture of the scriptures over the next 4 months. So read with pacing. Don't get bogged down with words or with phrases or things that may pop up. You're going to mark it, and I'm going to show you that's tip number 5 actually. But at this point, tip number 4 would be read with pacing. You want to go at a good pace to accomplish the chapters that you'll be reading for the day. Tip number 5, breadcrumbs. So even though you're going to be reading at a good pace, you still want to be open to what God might want to show you. So here's what I mean by breadcrumbs. So as I'm reading, let's say Genesis chapter 4, Cain murders Abel. So maybe I'm reading through this and something jumps out at me, a word or a phrase. What I do is I just quickly mark by leaving a dot. And maybe you can use a pencil for this one, or you could like underline real quick. So what I want to do is just leave a breadcrumb, like a dot, or maybe a marking over to the margin and saying, okay, I want to go back to this later, but I want to keep reading. So what I do is I leave breadcrumbs all along the way, not like super involved underlining or marking, just something really quick so that when I look back, I know what parts stood out, or I'll remember what parts stood out. Tip number 6 is when I get to Genesis chapter 12, when I'm done with the day's readings, what I'll do then is review. So I go back to Genesis chapter 1, and then what I'll do is from Genesis chapter 1, I'll just go back and scan all of the pages that I read through. And if there was a breadcrumb, for instance, in Genesis chapter 4 that I left, then I'll go back and underline it or then make some notes on it over on the margins. It's a good way to just review again what you read so that it can stick more with you. So the last thing you want to do is to pray and ask. So after you've reviewed, after you've looked over all the breadcrumbs, close your time out with God by praying and asking and saying, okay, Lord, I just read a vast amount of words and chapters. I've underlined some of the things that stood out to me. What else do you want me to see? What else do you want me to know about the things that I have read? So last thing is pray and ask. So you could see that this type of reading, even though it's going to be going at a good pace, it's not going to be inactive reading, but actually it's a form of active reading. So let me just do another review. Number one, decide where, when, and with what you'll be reading. Pray, invite God and ask Him to remind you that He is present with you. Preview what you're going to read, scan through what you're going to read, making use of those headers of each chapter. Read with pacing. Leave breadcrumbs behind. The sixth thing is review. You're going to go back and look over the chapters that you just read. And the seventh thing is to pray and ask. Happy reading to you guys. We're going to start this week. Friday, September 1st is the beginning of this reading plan. Have a good day, everybody.